The air was thick with the smell of fresh grass and the distant sound of children playing, until the sickening crack of metal echoed through the playground. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. My disabled daughter, so innocent and full of life, had been struck by a hammer. The force of the blow left her crumpled on the ground, blood pooling beneath her like a horrifying nightmare I couldn't escape. I rushed toward her, panic gripping my every step, but the one responsible, Karen from the HOA, was already walking away, her cold eyes staring ahead, unbothered by the chaos she had just created. My daughter was bleeding out, and Karen just left her there. I yelled for help, my voice cracking, but it felt like no one heard. Everything went into slow motion, the sirens, the faces of bystanders frozen in disbelief. Was this really happening? The woman who had terrorized our family for so long, now turning her back when my daughter needed help the most. But as I knelt beside my daughter, I saw something that made my blood run cold, a message that made me question everything I thought I knew. Could this attack have been planned? Before that fateful day, our family lived a peaceful life, nestled in the warmth of our home. My daughter, Lily, was the heart of our little world. At 10 years old, she was a bright, spirited soul, even though she faced challenges that most children never would. Born with cerebral palsy, Lily had limited mobility, but she never let it stop her from dreaming big or smiling even bigger. Her laugh was infectious, her love for life undeniable. I watched her fight every day, not just to live, but to truly live, to experience the world and connect with others despite her limitations. We did everything together, from enjoying the sunshine in our backyard to reading books on the porch, each moment treasured like it was the last. I knew that life wasn't always easy for her, but we made sure it was filled with love and joy. Her laughter echoed in our home, a sound I would never trade for anything. But that tranquility was shattered by Karen, the woman who lived 2 doors down, and who had become the nightmare of our community. At first, Karen seemed like just another neighbor, but over time, her obsession with controlling everything around her grew to unsettling proportions. It started with small complaints: too many cars in the driveway, a misplaced trash bin, a fence that wasn't up to her standard. But soon, it became clear that her vendetta was personal. She had it out for our family from the moment we moved in. It wasn't enough for her to follow the rules, she needed to dictate them to everyone, and when my daughter's disability became known, Karen started her relentless attacks. From the playground ban to constant complaints about disruptions, Karen was always there, lurking in the background, watching, waiting for the slightest reason to strike. Karen's appearance was just as cold as her behavior: sharp eyes that seemed to scrutinize everything, an always perfect bob haircut, and a voice that dripped with judgment. She had been part of the HOA for years, wielding her power like a weapon. It wasn't long before we realized that her hatred for our family wasn't just about rules. There was something darker beneath the surface, something that would soon be revealed in the most unimaginable way. It all started one lazy Saturday afternoon when Lily and I decided to head to the playground in our neighborhood. It was a typical weekend for us. I helped her into her wheelchair, we packed a couple of snacks, and we made our way to the nearby park. Lily had always loved the swings, the sensation of flying through the air, even if it was just for a few moments. It made her feel free, like all the world's boundaries disappeared, and I couldn't deny her that joy. But as we arrived that day, something felt off. The playground was unusually quiet, almost too quiet. As I pushed Lily toward the swings, I noticed her face. She seemed uneasy, and I couldn't figure out why. It was then I saw Karen, standing at the entrance of the park, her arms crossed and eyes locked on us. Her expression was cold, her lips pressed into a tight line. I'd seen that look before, the one that meant trouble was brewing. She didn't approach us right away. Instead, she stood there, glaring, as if she was waiting for us to make a mistake. It was a look I had become all too familiar with over the past few months. Karen had always had something to say about how we lived, the way we navigated the world. Whether it was a complaint about our lawn or the way our garden shed was positioned, she was relentless. But this time, it was different. It was personal. I tried to shake off the feeling, focusing on getting Lily settled on the swing. But then, Karen walked over, her heels clicking sharply on the pavement. She didn't even greet us, she just launched into her tirade. "You're not supposed to be here," she sneered, her voice laced with venom. "This park is for children, not whatever that is." Her eyes flicked to Lily in her wheelchair, her disgust barely hidden. I was taken aback. What did she mean, not whatever that is? Lily wasn't just something. She was my daughter. She was a child. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "This is a public park, Karen. We're not breaking any rules." But Karen wasn't backing down. "Oh, I know it's public," she spat. "But it's also part of the HOA's jurisdiction, and you're in violation of the rules. Your daughter is an eyesore here, disturbing the peace." The words hit me like a punch in the gut. An eyesore? My daughter, who fought every day just to get out of bed, was being called that? Before I could respond, Karen continued, her tone more aggressive. "I'll be reporting this. It's too much of a distraction. It's annoying." Her eyes narrowed, her lips curling into a smug smile. She was enjoying this, I could see it in her eyes. I felt the pressure mounting. It wasn't the first time Karen had targeted us, but this was the first time her venom had been so blatant. As much as I wanted to argue, I could feel my heart racing, the air thick with the tension she had created. "I'll call the HOA, Karen threatened, turning on her heel, not even waiting for me to respond. "You'll regret this." And with that, she left, leaving behind the weight of her words and a sense of dread that I couldn't shake. But what she didn't know was that her words weren't the end of it. The true nightmare had only just begun. As the day went on, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Why was she so focused on making our lives miserable? What had we done to deserve this kind of treatment? The more I thought about it, the more I realized, this wasn't just about petty HOA rules. Karen had something much darker in mind, something far more dangerous than we could ever have imagined. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm glow over the playground as Lily and I sat on the swings, her gentle laughter filling the air as I pushed her back and forth. It should have been a peaceful moment, just a mother and her daughter enjoying the simple joys of life. But the peace was shattered in an instant. I had just started pushing Lily higher when I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind us. The sharp, rhythmic click of Karen's heels echoed through the playground like a death knell, and my heart sank. I turned to see her standing there, a strange, unsettling look in her eyes. She wasn't just glaring this time, there was something more in her gaze, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. She was holding something, something shiny. Before I could react, Karen was upon us. Her face twisted into an angry sneer, her lips barely moving as she muttered, "I warned you." She raised her arm, and I saw it clearly for the first time, a heavy, rusted hammer, its handle gleaming menacingly in the dimming light. I froze, my brain struggling to process what was happening. "Karen, what are you doing?" My voice trembled with disbelief. But she didn't answer. She swung the hammer with a vicious, practiced motion, the heavy metal crashing into the side of Lily's wheelchair with a sickening thud. The sound of metal meeting bone and flesh echoed in the empty playground, the force of the blow sending Lily's chair toppling sideways, sending her crashing to the ground. Time seemed to slow as Lily screamed, the sound piercing through the air, but it wasn't just the shock of the attack that hit me, it was the panic, the pure, unfiltered terror that flooded my chest. "Lily!" I screamed, rushing toward her, but Karen was already taking another step forward, the hammer poised to strike again. My heart raced, adrenaline pumping through my veins as I threw myself in front of my daughter, arms raised, ready to protect her at any cost. But Karen didn't stop. She swung again, and I barely managed to dodge the blow, feeling the wind from the hammer was past my face. My heart was in my throat as I grabbed Lily's hand, pulling her toward me, trying to shield her with my body, but Karen was relentless. Stay down, she hissed, swinging the hammer like it was a toy, her eyes wild with fury. The next strike landed with brutal force, catching me off guard. The hammer slammed into my shoulder, sending a sharp pain shooting through my body. I gasped, staggering back, my legs giving out from under me. My vision blurred, and for a moment, I thought I might lose consciousness. But my focus was still on Lily. She was lying on the ground, trying to move but unable to escape, her small body trembling with pain. "Lily, stay with me," I whispered, reaching for her, but the blood was already pooling around her, her face pale, her lips trembling. She was struggling to breathe, her body convulsing with the effort to stay conscious. "I'm right here, sweetheart," I choked out, trying to lift her into my arms, but my strength was failing me. Karen didn't care. She took one last look at us, her eyes glinting with some sick satisfaction, before turning and walking away. The sound of her footsteps faded into the distance, leaving nothing but the deafening silence in her wake. My world collapsed around me as I knelt beside Lily, blood staining my hands as I tried to stop the bleeding. The playground, which had once been a place of laughter and joy, now felt like a cold, unforgiving prison. I could feel Lily slipping away in my arms, her breathing growing more shallow with every passing second. "Please, stay with me," I whispered, my voice cracking as tears blurred my vision. But the reality was settling in, I had to act fast. If I didn't get help soon, I would lose her. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking uncontrollably as I dialed 911, the numbers blurring on the screen. "Please, my daughter's been attacked," I gasped, struggling to hold back the sobs that threatened to consume me. "I need help. Now." But as I waited for the operator to respond, I looked down at Lily's face, the terror in her eyes slowly fading, replaced by a look of resignation. The blood continued to flow, and I could feel her weakening in my arms. Every second felt like an eternity. Was she going to die here, in this empty playground, abandoned by the one person who was supposed to protect her? The thought twisted my gut, but I couldn't give up. Not now. With one last, desperate push, I lifted Lily as best as I could, the weight of her body pulling me down, but I refused to let go. As I stumbled toward the exit, the world seemed to blur around me. Every step was a battle, every breath a struggle. But I wasn't going to lose her. Not to Karen. Not to anyone. I finally made it to the parking lot, where I flagged down a passerby, my voice barely a whisper as I begged for help. "Please, help, my daughter." The next few moments were a blur of flashing lights and panicked voices, but I never left Lily's side. Through the pain, through the terror, I held on to the one thing that mattered most, my daughter's life. And yet, even as the paramedics rushed us to the hospital, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that this was just the beginning. What kind of person would do this to a child? What kind of monster was Karen? The answers would come, but not in the way I ever expected. The world felt like it was spinning as I held Lily in my arms, the weight of the situation pressing down on me like 1,000 tons. The moment Karen had left us in that playground, the air seemed to grow thicker, the light dimmer, as if the universe itself had recognized the cruelty that had just unfolded. My daughter, my sweet, innocent girl, was bleeding, and there I was, helpless, broken, terrified. The drive to the hospital was a blur. I held Lily close, speaking to her in a frantic whisper, my words becoming less coherent as I begged her to hold on. I could feel her pulse weakening in my hands, her breath shallow, and I feared the worst with every passing second. It wasn't until the paramedics arrived that the crushing weight of the situation truly hit me. They took over immediately, working with precision, but nothing could ease the cold dread that had settled in my chest. "Please, you have to save her," I whispered to the paramedics, my voice barely audible through the flood of panic in my mind. They reassured me, but their faces said it all. Their calm professionalism was a front, hiding the reality that Lily's injuries were far worse than I'd hoped. They loaded her into the ambulance, and I followed, feeling like I was living in a nightmare where nothing was real. At the hospital, it felt like time had stopped. I sat in the sterile waiting room, surrounded by the low hum of the fluorescent lights and the distant murmur of other patients and doctors. But none of that mattered. All I could think about was Lily. Every noise, every movement in the room felt distant. Nothing could pull me from the grim thoughts swirling in my head. How did this happen? How could Karen do this? I kept replaying the moment over and over, trying to make sense of it. It didn't make sense. Karen wasn't just a bitter neighbor, she had crossed the line from petty hostility to something far darker. But how did the world allow someone like her to have so much power? Hours later, a police officer approached me as I sat in the waiting room, his expression unreadable. "Ma'am, we've received your report. We've got a statement from a few witnesses, but we're treating this as an accident for now. A tragic misunderstanding." I stared at him, disbelief clouding my thoughts. "What do you mean, an accident?" I choked, my voice cracking under the weight of it all. "My daughter was attacked by that woman. She hit her with a hammer." The officer's gaze shifted uncomfortably, and he seemed to hesitate. "We'll look into it, ma'am, but right now, it looks like she's injured, yes, but the situation isn't clear. We don't have enough evidence yet to file charges." I felt my blood run cold. "What do you mean, not enough evidence?" I nearly shouted, but the officer's calm demeanor only made me more furious. "You think this is some kind of accident? She tried to kill my daughter." The officer's eyes narrowed, but he didn't seem surprised by my outburst. "We'll gather all the details, but right now, it's just a report." The words stung, like acid in my mouth. I wanted to scream, to demand justice right then and there, but all I could do was sit there, staring at the officer, my heart pounding with frustration and helplessness. Was this really how the world worked? Was this what my daughter's life was worth, just an accident, to be dismissed and forgotten? The cold realization settled in. I had to do this myself. If the authorities wouldn't take this seriously, I would. I had no choice. The fight for justice had just begun, and I was ready to do whatever it took to make sure Karen would pay for what she'd done. But first, I had to keep my daughter alive long enough to see it through. In the days that followed Lily's brutal attack, the hospital became a place of limbo. The sterile, impersonal walls seemed to close in on me, as if they were suffocating me with their silence. The doctors worked tirelessly, but there was no guarantee that Lily would make it. The injury had caused severe damage to her internal organs, and she was in critical condition. I stayed by her side, unwilling to leave her, praying for a miracle. Every beep from the machines, every shift of the nurse's eyes, sent a wave of anxiety crashing over me. I had no time to process what had happened, I just needed Lily to pull through. But amidst the chaos, something else began to nag at me, a feeling deep in my gut that told me there was more to Karen's attack than I could see. This wasn't just about petty HOA rules or the long-standing grudge she had held against us. No, something felt darker, more twisted, and I wasn't going to let it go until I had the answers. A few days after the incident, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I had tried everything to get answers from the police, but they kept brushing me off, telling me it was too soon for any real investigation. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized Karen wasn't just some angry neighbor, she had a past. A past that was being deliberately hidden from everyone, including me. It was time to dig deeper, and I wasn't going to stop until I uncovered the truth. I started by talking to a few neighbors, ones who had witnessed the attack. The one thing they all seemed to agree on was how strange Karen had been acting in the days leading up to the attack. She'd been more irritable than usual, more agitated, and had been seen walking around the neighborhood at odd hours, her eyes darting around as if she was on edge. No one knew why, but I suspected it was linked to something more than just the HOA. It wasn't until I spoke to a woman named Linda, who lived a few houses down from Karen, that I started to uncover something strange. Linda had always been friendly, but she seemed to be avoiding me ever since the attack. When I cornered her one afternoon, she finally opened up, her voice trembling as she spoke. "I'm not supposed to be saying anything," Linda whispered, looking over her shoulder as if someone might be listening. "But Karen, she's been under a lot of stress lately. Not just from the HOA stuff, but there's more. I overheard her on the phone a few weeks ago, talking about taking care of the problem, and how she couldn't keep covering it up. I don't know what it means, but it didn't sound like normal HOA nonsense." I leaned in, my heart racing. "What do you mean? What was she talking about?" Linda shook her head, clearly frightened. "I don't know. But I think it's related to her daughter. Karen. Karen doesn't talk about her much, but I've heard rumors. She's got a daughter, a troubled one. I don't know her name, but I've seen her around, always in the background, never really interacting with anyone. She looked like she was scared of Karen, like she was hiding something." A chill ran down my spine. Karen had a daughter? Why had she never mentioned her before? And why was she so secretive about her? I thanked Linda for the information and left, my mind racing with possibilities. Could this mysterious daughter be the key to understanding Karen's actions? Had Karen's own past somehow played into this attack on Lily? I had to find out more, but I knew that this was just the beginning. That night, I decided to visit the local library. I knew that there had to be records or old news articles that could give me some clue about Karen's history. As I sifted through old local newspapers, I found a few mentions of her name, nothing too revealing at first glance. But then, one headline caught my eye: Karen Hughes faces legal trouble over alleged abuse of disabled child. My blood ran cold. I grabbed the article and read through it in a daze. The article detailed a lawsuit filed by an advocacy group for disabled children, accusing Karen of emotionally and physically abusing her daughter. The case had been settled quietly, and the charges had been dropped, but the whispers in the community were loud. Apparently, Karen's daughter had been removed from the home for a short period before being returned. The article didn't go into detail about what had happened, but it was enough to make me question everything I thought I knew about Karen. I needed more answers. I couldn't just rely on these half-formed rumors and old newspaper clippings. I needed to find Karen's daughter, the one person who could tell me the truth. But finding her wasn't going to be easy. Karen had done a masterful job of keeping her hidden from the world, and I had no idea where to start. That's when I remembered something. A few weeks before the attack, Lily had mentioned seeing a woman at the park, someone who had been watching her from a distance, always with a sad look on her face. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now, in the wake of everything that had happened, it seemed too important to ignore. Could that woman have been Karen's daughter? Could she have been watching Lily all along, perhaps even planning something much darker? The next morning, I went back to the park, the place where everything had started. I spoke to a few parents who had been there around the same time as Lily, and finally, one woman remembered seeing a young woman sitting on a bench by the swings, watching Lily. The woman had appeared nervous, constantly glancing over her shoulder, as if she didn't want to be noticed. I followed the trail, talking to anyone who might have seen Karen's daughter. It wasn't long before I found someone who knew exactly who she was. Her name was Sarah, and she lived in a small apartment on the outskirts of town. But when I arrived, I was met with an unsettling silence. The door was cracked open, but the place felt deserted. I knocked, but there was no answer. I was about to leave when I saw a small scrap of paper lying on the floor just inside the door. It had a phone number written on it, one I recognized from the lawsuit documents. It was Karen's number. I called the number, my hands shaking as I waited for an answer. When Karen picked up, her voice was cold, even through the phone. "What do you want?" she asked, her tone icily familiar. "I'm coming for you," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and resolve. "You've hurt my daughter, and you'll pay for it." The line went silent for a moment before she responded with a laugh, dark and twisted. "You don't know the whole story, do you? There's more to this than you could ever imagine. And with those words, the truth began to unfold, unraveling like a slow-burning fuse. Karen had never been a victim of some HOA drama. No, this was something far deeper, far darker. And I was about to discover just how far her cruelty ran, and how much danger my family was still in. The battle for justice was never going to be easy, but I wasn't prepared for just how hard it would be. Every step I took toward holding Karen accountable for what she'd done to Lily felt like I was pushing a boulder uphill, only to watch it roll back down every time. The first hurdle came when I contacted the police, hoping for immediate action. I was met with skepticism and dismissal, as if my daughter's life wasn't worth taking seriously. Despite the clear evidence of her injuries, the authorities were reluctant to move forward. It's a complicated case, they told me. We need more time to investigate. Time? My daughter was fighting for her life in a hospital bed, and all I could do was watch the precious moments slip away. But I refused to back down. I hired a lawyer, hoping that the legal system would offer us the protection and justice we deserved. The lawyer, a sharp woman named Evelyn, assured me that we had a strong case. But as soon as we began, I realized how deeply entrenched Karen's influence was. She had managed to cultivate relationships with people in positions of power, neighbors, local officials, even some of the police officers who had been assigned to the case. It felt like every corner I turned, there was another obstacle placed in our path. We spent months gathering evidence. Photos of Lily's injuries, medical reports, witness statements, anything that could prove that Karen's actions weren't a simple accident. But every time we submitted something, it was either overlooked or ignored. I watched as Karen's legal team played the system, using every tactic to delay and discredit us. They tried to paint Lily's injury as a freak accident, claiming that Karen had acted in self-defense when she was provoked. They even managed to convince a few of the local media outlets to portray her as a misunderstood, overworked woman simply trying to maintain order in a chaotic world. The more they pushed this narrative, the more it seemed like the truth was being buried under a mountain of lies. It was a battle that seemed never-ending, and as the weeks turned into months, I could feel the weight of it all crushing me. There were moments when I felt like giving up, when the constant delays and legal maneuvering broke me down. Each time we were forced to face Karen's lawyers in court, it felt like I was reliving the horror of that day over and over again. The memories of Lily screaming in pain, of Karen's cold gaze as she walked away, haunted me. But the worst part was seeing how the system, the very thing we were fighting for, seemed to turn a blind eye to our suffering. It was as if Lily's pain, my pain, didn't matter as much as Karen's ability to manipulate the situation. I had moments of doubt, times when I questioned whether it was worth it. Could we really win? Was there any point in continuing this fight against someone with so much power and influence? The emotional toll was unbearable. I had to balance caring for Lily as she healed, physically and emotionally, while also diving deep into the legal battle. My own health began to suffer. I was losing weight, unable to sleep, constantly on edge. But the thought of giving up wasn't an option. I couldn't let Lily down. I couldn't let Karen get away with what she had done. In the midst of this despair, there was a moment that gave me hope. One of the witnesses, a man who had been at the park that day, came forward. He had seen Karen standing over Lily, hammer raised, and had been too afraid to speak up at first. But after hearing about the ongoing legal proceedings, he finally found the courage to testify. His statement was a turning point. The police began to take the case more seriously, and Evelyn started to push harder for charges to be brought against Karen. We also discovered that Karen had been hiding crucial evidence. She had falsified documents regarding her daughter's past injuries in an attempt to make it seem like Lily was the aggressor. This revelation was enough to shift the tide in our favor. We had proof that Karen's actions weren't just a random outburst, they were premeditated, planned, and malicious. But even as we gained ground, there were moments when it felt like the fight was futile. Karen's wealth and influence allowed her to stall the trial, dragging it on for months, using every trick in the book to delay proceedings. It became clear that we were not just fighting for justice for Lily, we were fighting against a system that was broken, against a woman who had managed to manipulate everything in her path. I remember the day when the court ruled in our favor. It wasn't a clear win, it wasn't the justice I had hoped for, not in the way I had imagined. Karen was convicted of aggravated assault, but she received a slap on the wrist, community service and a fine, nothing close to the punishment she deserved. The sentence was a bitter pill to swallow, and for a while, I wondered if it was worth the years of fighting, the toll it had taken on us. But then I looked at Lily, who was slowly regaining her strength, and I knew that, in some way, it had been worth it. We had exposed the truth. We had fought against the darkness that Karen had tried to keep hidden. And that, in itself, was a victory. But even with the legal victory, I knew the emotional scars would remain. The legal battle had torn us apart in ways I never expected, and Karen's cruelty was something I would never forget. But we had fought back. And though the fight for justice was long and painful, it had ignited a fire in me, one that would never go out. The battle wasn't over. The world may have tried to silence us, but I wasn't done yet. Karen had hurt my family, and I would never stop fighting to ensure that her cruelty was exposed for all to see. The day of the final hearing arrived, and the tension was unbearable. My heart pounded in my chest as I sat in the courtroom, watching Karen's smug expression across the room. She sat there like she had already won, her hands folded neatly on the table, her eyes occasionally flicking toward me with that same cold, calculating look. But this time, something was different. I could feel the change in the air, a shift that no one could ignore. The case had dragged on for far too long, and now, it was coming to a head. Lily had been through so much, physically and emotionally. The attack had shattered her, but she was stronger than I ever imagined. It wasn't just the doctors or the lawyers who were fighting for her now, she had found the strength to stand up for herself. Lily had always been a quiet, reserved girl, especially after everything she had been through, but over the past few months, she had begun to speak out. Her recovery wasn't just about healing from the attack, it was about reclaiming her life, her voice, and her dignity. The courtroom was packed. The witnesses, the lawyers, the media, it was all too much. I could feel the weight of their gazes on me, waiting for something to happen. Waiting for a resolution that seemed so elusive, so out of reach. But then, it happened. Just as Karen's lawyer began to argue yet another point in her defense, a small voice cut through the noise, calm but unwavering. "I want to speak." The room fell silent, every head turning toward Lily. She was sitting beside me, her wheelchair positioned carefully so she could face the judge. She had insisted on being there in person, on standing for herself, no matter how difficult it was. I had never been more proud in my life. Lily's eyes met mine, and I could see the fire in them. She was ready. With a deep breath, she spoke again, louder this time, her voice steady. "I remember everything. I remember when Karen hit me with the hammer. I remember how it felt, how I screamed and begged her to stop. And I remember how she just left me there to bleed out. I know she's lying. And I know what she did was wrong. I'm not afraid anymore. I want her to know that." The room was still. There was no murmuring, no shifting in seats. All that could be heard was the soft sound of Lily's voice cutting through the air, telling the truth that had been buried under layers of lies. I could feel my own tears rising, but I didn't dare let them fall. This moment wasn't for me, it was for Lily. Karen's face had drained of color. Her usual composure faltered for a fraction of a second, and I saw a flash of something I hadn't seen before: fear. She was afraid. And for the first time, I realized something important: she was afraid of the truth. Lily wasn't just speaking for herself anymore. She was speaking for every victim who had ever been silenced, for every person who had been overlooked or dismissed. And she wasn't going to be ignored anymore. The judge looked at Lily, his expression softening, and then turned his gaze to Karen, who sat frozen, her face a mask of disbelief. "You have no further questions, Mrs. Hughes?" the judge asked calmly. Karen's lawyer hesitated, clearly thrown off by Lily's testimony, but he quickly regained his composure and muttered, "No, Your Honor." The judge nodded. "Then it's clear to me that we have sufficient evidence to proceed with the case. I'm issuing a ruling today." In that moment, everything seemed to stand still. The scales of justice, which had seemed so unbalanced, began to tip in our favor. Lily had found the courage to speak her truth, and it was the moment that changed everything. Karen's lawyer tried one last-ditch effort to argue, but it was too late. The truth was out, and there was no escaping it now. The judge's ruling came down swiftly. Karen was found guilty of aggravated assault and attempted murder. The sentence was harsh, years in prison, along with a hefty fine and a permanent restraining order against our family. Karen's face twisted in disbelief as the judge pronounced the verdict. She didn't even look at Lily. She couldn't. Her carefully constructed world of lies had shattered, and there was nothing she could do to piece it back together. I looked at Lily, who was smiling, her face glowing with the satisfaction of knowing that she had finally stood up for herself. It wasn't just a legal victory, it was her victory. She had taken back her power, and nothing would ever take that from her again. The fight had been long, brutal, and painful, but in this moment, it was all worth it. And as I held Lily's hand, I knew that we had won, not just against Karen, but against every injustice we had ever faced. The courtroom buzzed with quiet whispers as the gavel came down, sealing Karen's fate. The judge's ruling was swift and final, guilty on all counts. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I allowed myself a deep breath. It was over. Karen would face the consequences of her actions, and the weight that had hung over our family for so long had finally lifted. But as the courtroom cleared, and I looked at Lily sitting beside me, her face a mixture of exhaustion and relief, I realized that the resolution we'd fought so hard for didn't come without a price. Lily's recovery, both physically and emotionally, was just beginning. The scars she carried would never fade completely. There was no real return to normal after what we had been through. The trauma would remain, embedded in our memories forever. The attack was a defining moment in her life, a moment that had taken away her innocence and had forced her to grow up faster than any child should. As for Karen, the consequences she faced were severe: years behind bars, a fine that would bankrupt her, and the lifelong stigma of being a criminal in a small community. She had built her life on manipulation, control, and cruelty, but that all came crumbling down the moment she made the decision to attack my daughter. Her reign of terror was over, but even as she was led away in handcuffs, I couldn't shake the sense that this victory didn't feel like one. She had taken so much from us, and no legal ruling could give that back. The months after the trial were a blur. Lily's physical injuries healed, but the emotional scars were harder to mend. There were days when she would retreat into herself, not wanting to speak or even leave the house. I watched my once vibrant, confident daughter withdraw, her sparkle dimming as she processed the trauma in her own way. Therapy sessions became a part of our routine, and though Lily hated it, I knew she needed the space to confront the anger and fear she felt. We also faced scrutiny from our neighbors and the media. Some supported us, rallying behind our family as the case became a local symbol of standing up against injustice. Others, however, sided with Karen, believing her version of the story or simply choosing to ignore the truth. But despite the whispers and the judgment, we remained strong. We had fought for Lily's voice, and we had been heard. There were still moments when I would find myself staring at the walls of our house, questioning everything that had led us here. What if we hadn't taken a stand? What if we had ignored the signs? Could Lily have avoided the pain she'd suffered if we had acted sooner? The what-ifs haunted me, but I reminded myself that we had done the best we could. No one could have predicted the depths of Karen's cruelty. In the quiet of our home, we found solace. It wasn't the kind of peace I had once imagined. there were no celebrations or grand moments of closure. But there was something else, a quiet resilience. Lily and I, together, had faced the unimaginable and come out stronger on the other side. Our bond was unbreakable. She was beginning to smile again, to reclaim some of the joy she had lost, though I knew it would take time. We had won justice, but it had come at a cost we could never fully understand. Karen's punishment was her own, but the emotional toll she had exacted on our family would remain long after the trial ended. There would be days when Lily would feel the weight of that pain, and there would be moments when I would wonder if the scars would ever fully fade. But for now, we had peace. Not the kind of peace I once dreamed of, but a new kind, a hard-earned peace that came from the knowledge that we had faced our darkest moments and survived. And though the world moved on, there was one thing I knew for sure: Karen may have taken so much from us, but she could never take our strength, our resolve, or the love that kept us going. And so, as the years went by, our family began to heal, not just from the attack, but from the realization that justice, though served, was only the beginning of our journey. Lily, stronger than ever, would rise above the darkness. And I, as her mother, would always be by her side, no matter what. As I sat beside Lily, watching her take her first steps toward a future she never asked for, I couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of pride. Her resilience, her ability to rise from the ashes of her own pain, was nothing short of extraordinary. Every day, she showed me that no matter how dark the world becomes, the human spirit can shine brighter. It was that strength, that unwavering courage, that made everything we had fought for worth it. Lily had become a warrior, not just surviving but thriving, and nothing could ever take that away from her. But this story isn't over. There are still battles to fight, injustices to expose, and stories that need to be told. If you thought this story was shocking, you won't believe what's coming next. There are more heroes, more villains, and more moments that will leave you breathless. If you want to hear the truth, the stories that others refuse to tell, and witness the power of justice unfolding, then hit that subscribe button. Stay with us as we uncover the untold stories of strength, survival, and revenge. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next.